I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd end up questioning everything about my marriage. When Clara and I stood in front of our friends and family 12 years ago, exchanging vows, I genuinely believed we'd found something unshakable. We were a team. Me, the practical, level-headed planner, and her, the spirited, vibrant dreamer. Our differences balanced us, at least for a while. But over the last year or so, something shifted. It wasn't a single moment or fight. It was more like the slow erosion of a shoreline, subtle and gradual until one day you realize the land you stood on isn't there anymore. And now, as I sit here in our living room, surrounded by reminders of the life we built, I can't help but wonder how long it's been slipping through my fingers. Clara has always been busy. Her career as a wedding planner demands long hours, last-minute changes, and a flair for handling chaos. She thrives in that environment, and for most of our marriage, I admired her for it. But somewhere along the line, her work stopped feeling like a job and started feeling like a wall. She wasn't just busy, she was absent. It started small. Clara began staying out later than usual, claiming that her clients were becoming increasingly demanding. People want perfection, she'd say, her voice tinged with exhaustion as she kicked off her shoes in the hallway. I wanted to believe her, and I did for a while. After all, relationships ebb and flow, right? Not every season is going to feel like the honeymoon phase. But then the little things started to pile up. Our Thursday night dinners, a tradition since our first wedding anniversary, became an afterthought. At first, she'd call or text to cancel, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, Jonah. This couple is a nightmare. They need me to fix this AS." I told myself it was temporary, that we'd get back to us once her schedule lightened up. Except it never did. Eventually, she stopped apologizing altogether. Thursdays came and went, and I ate alone at our favorite Italian place, telling myself she'd make it up to me next week. She didn't. The first real red flag came last Tuesday. Clara had left her digital planner open on the tablet we share, a rare lapse for someone who'd recently started keeping her devices under tight lock and key. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I just wanted to check the weather for the weekend, but when I saw her schedule, one entry caught my eye, Tower 27. It was cryptic, unlike her usual detailed work appointments. Clara is meticulous about her scheduling, so seeing something so vague was strange. I didn't recognize the name, but it didn't sound like a venue or a client. Later that evening, as she brushed her teeth, I leaned against the bathroom doorway and asked casually, "Hey, what's Tower 27? Saw it in your planner." Her reaction was immediate but subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Her hand paused mid-brush, just for a fraction of a second, before she continued like nothing happened. "Oh, that? It's just a work thing," she said, spitting out toothpaste. "One of my clients is indecisive, so I've been using placeholder names until they finalize the venue." She smiled at me in the mirror, her tone light and dismissive, but something about it didn't sit right. The words felt rehearsed, like she'd anticipated the question. I nodded and let it go, but a knot tightened in my stomach. Since when did Clara use placeholders? She was the kind of person who color-coded her planner and added detailed notes for every meeting. Why would this client be any different? And if it really was a work thing, why not just say so up front? The next few days only deepened my unease. Clara started taking her phone with her everywhere, something she'd never done before. Shower? Phone. Quick trip to the kitchen? Phone. She'd always been a little attached to her devices, but this was different. It was almost as if she didn't want to risk leaving it unattended. Then there were the late-night calls. She'd excuse herself to the bedroom or step outside, claiming it was client stuff. I could hear her muffled laughter through the door, softer and more private than I was used to. That laugh, it wasn't for me anymore. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. We've all heard stories of people jumping to conclusions and ruining their relationships over nothing. I didn't want to be that guy. But every time I tried to brush it off, another odd detail would crop up, like Clara asking me to cover for her on errands she used to love doing herself. It all came to a head when I noticed something seemingly insignificant. Clara started dressing differently. My wife has always had great style, a perfect blend of professional and chic, but lately, her wardrobe choices felt off. She'd traded her usual understated elegance for bold, eye-catching pieces that she wouldn't normally wear to work. One morning, she left the house in a fitted blazer and heels that were higher than anything she'd worn in years. "Big client pitch," she said, kissing me on the cheek, but her explanation felt thin, like the words didn't match the picture in front of me. The final straw was her laughter. It sounds strange, I know, but when you've been married as long as we have, you know your partner's laugh, the way it sounds when it's real versus when it's polite or forced. The laugh I kept hearing on those late-night calls? It wasn't real, but it wasn't fake either. It was private, intimate, like she was sharing a joke that only the person on the other end would understand. And that person wasn't me. I wish I could say I confronted her right then and there, demanded answers about Tower 27 and the strange changes in her behavior. But I didn't. I wanted to believe that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, that Clara wasn't hiding anything. So I pushed the doubts down and told myself to trust her. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. And Tower 27 wasn't just a name in her planner. It was the first crack in the foundation of everything we'd built together. By the time the charity gala came around, I was already on edge. Clara had mentioned it offhand one evening, saying she'd been invited as a last-minute replacement for another planner. She made it sound routine, like it was just another part of her job, but something about her tone didn't sit right. It wasn't excitement or annoyance. It was something in between, something guarded. "I think I'll sit this one out," I said when she first brought it up. "You'll be networking all night anyway." To my surprise, she hesitated. "Actually, why don't you come? It might be fun." Her invitation threw me off balance. Clara had been so secretive lately that her offer felt almost like a dare. Did she want me to go? Or was she just testing me? "All right," I said after a pause. "I'll be your plus one." The night of the event, Clara emerged from our bedroom, wearing a sleek black gown with a daring side slit. The dress hugged her curves in a way that made my heart skip, but it wasn't just the dress that caught me off guard. It was her whole demeanor. She looked radiant, confident in a way I hadn't seen in months. But something about her felt different. It was as though she'd become a stranger, someone I didn't quite know anymore. "Does it look okay?" she asked, giving a little twirl. "You look amazing," I said, and I meant it. But the words felt heavy, weighed down by the questions swirling in my mind. Was she dressing up for me? Or for someone else? At the gala, Clara seemed unusually animated. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, laughing and chatting with strangers like she was the star of the show. I tried to stay by her side, but she kept drifting away, claiming she needed to network. Every time I caught sight of her, she was deep in conversation with someone new, her smile wide and dazzling. It wasn't until dinner that I noticed something odd. Clara kept adjusting her gown, tugging at the fabric around her thighs. At first, I thought it was just a wardrobe malfunction, but then I caught a glimpse of her bare skin beneath the slit of her dress. My stomach turned as I realized the truth. She wasn't wearing any underwear. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a fashion choice, something practical for the dress. But combined with everything else, the secrecy, the evasive answers, the private phone calls, it felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I didn't say anything, but my mind was racing. After dinner, Clara excused herself to freshen up and disappeared for an unusually long time. I waited, sipping my wine and trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. When she didn't return after 20 minutes, I decided to look for her. I wandered through the event hall, then out into the vineyard's open-air garden. The night was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the noise and energy of the gala. As I rounded a corner, I saw her. Clara was standing near a secluded bench, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of string lights. She wasn't alone. Beside her was a man, a tall, silver-haired stranger with an easy confidence. They were close, too close. She leaned in as he whispered something in her ear, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I froze. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't move. They weren't touching in a way that could be called intimate, but their body language spoke volumes. There was an ease between them, a familiarity that didn't belong between strangers. I wanted to march over there, to demand answers, but something held me back. Instead, I turned and walked away, my mind reeling. By the time Clara returned to the table, her face was a picture of composure, as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me, her eyes bright and untroubled. "Sorry, got caught up in a conversation," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I nodded, forcing a smile. "No problem." But inside, I was a storm. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. The image of her with that man played over and over in my mind. Was I imagining things? Was I blowing it all out of proportion? Or was this the confirmation I'd been dreading? The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about Tower 27. I opened Clara's planner again, scrolling through her upcoming appointments. There it was, listed for the following weekend. This time I didn't ask her about it. I needed to know the truth, and I knew I wasn't going to get it by asking questions she'd already prepared answers for. On Saturday, Clara left the house dressed casually, saying she had a client luncheon at a venue out of town. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but as soon as she was out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed. She drove for over an hour, heading into the countryside. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close, until she pulled into a small parking lot at the edge of a forest trailhead. My heart sank as I watched her step out of the car and greet a man in hiking gear. It wasn't the silver-haired stranger from the Gala, but someone else, shorter, younger, with a rugged charm. They embraced, holding each other for just a little too long, before heading down the trail together. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. This wasn't a client. This wasn't work. Clara had lied to me again, and now I had the proof. But knowing the truth didn't make it any easier to accept. In that moment, I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. When Clara returned home later that evening, I was waiting for her. By the time Clara walked through the door that evening, I'd had hours to sit with my anger, my hurt, and my growing sense of betrayal. The hike she'd supposedly gone on with her client replayed in my mind like a broken record. That embrace, the way they disappeared into the woods together, it all pointed to the one conclusion I didn't want to face. Clara was having an affair. I was sitting on the couch when she walked in, still in her hiking gear. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She looked carefree, even happy. It made me sick. "Hey," she said, setting her keys on the counter. "How was your day? How was the hike?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as I could manage. She froze for a split second before answering. "Good. The clients love the venue. I think it's going to be perfect for their wedding." There was the lie, smooth as silk. My heart pounded as I rose from the couch and walked toward her. "Is that right?" I said, my voice sharper now, because I took a drive today. Ended up at this trailhead out in the middle of nowhere. Imagine my surprise when I saw you there. With him, her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, and then her expression hardened. "You followed me?" she said, her voice laced with indignation. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare turn this around on me." "Who is he, Clara? Don't lie to me. I saw you." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she looked away, her shoulders slumping. "His name is Miles," she said quietly. "He's a wedding planner. I met him at a conference last year." "And what exactly are you doing with him?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Clara hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell me. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "We're friends. That's all. He's been going through a rough time, and I've been there for him." I let out a bitter laugh. "Friends? Do all your friends hold you like that? Do they go on secret hikes with you while you lie to your husband about where you are?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It's not like that," she said, her voice breaking. "It's complicated. Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You lied to me, Clara. over and over again. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? To see you with another man and realize I've been a fool this whole time. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't plan any of this. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. So, it's true, I said, my voice hollow. You cheated? She didn't answer right away, and the silence was deafening. Finally, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't physical, she said quickly. I swear, Jonah, I would never do that. I stared at her, my chest tight with rage and disbelief. And I'm supposed to believe that? After all the lies, all the sneaking around? I was lonely, she said, her voice breaking. You've been so distant lately, so wrapped up in work and routines. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to you anymore. Her words stung, but they didn't justify what she'd done. So what? I shot back. Instead of talking to me, you decided to confide in some stranger? To lie to me? To betray me? He's not a stranger, she said, her voice trembling. Miles lost his wife last year. He was grieving, and I wanted to help. It started as friendship, but somewhere along the way, it got messy. I didn't mean for it to happen, Jonah. I didn't want to hurt you. I shook my head, my mind racing. You didn't want to hurt me, but you lied to my face. Over and over again. Do you even realize how selfish that is? Clara broke down, her sobs filling the room. I'm sorry, she said, her voice choked with tears. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I love you, Jonah. I do. Her words felt hollow, like they couldn't reach the part of me that had been shattered by her betrayal. I wanted to believe her, to hold on to the life we'd built together. But how could I? How could I ever trust her again? As I stood there, trying to process everything, Clara reached for my hand. Please, she said, give me a chance to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I pulled my hand away, the gesture feeling like a small act of self-preservation. I need time, I said, my voice cold. I need to figure out if there's anything left to fix. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll wait, she said. I'll do whatever you need. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past her and out the door, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. Walking out of that room was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My feet felt heavy, as if every step was a decision to leave behind the life I thought I knew. As the door closed behind me, the silence in the hallway was deafening, a stark contrast to the storm raging in my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The first few days after the confrontation were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara standing by that bench in the vineyard, her hand resting on his arm, her face lit with a smile that wasn't for me. The betrayal replayed in my mind on a loop, each memory cutting deeper than the last. I called in sick to work, unable to face the world. My colleagues were used to me being the steady, reliable one, but I couldn't even muster the energy to respond to their concerned texts. Instead, I spent my days sitting in the dark, replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for the cracks I'd missed. How had I let this happen? Was it my fault? Had I been too distant, too caught up in my own routines to notice that Clara was slipping away? The questions haunted me, each one eroding my sense of self-worth. I felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a person. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted with everything, had found solace in someone else. What did that say about me? My best friend, Layla, was the one who finally pulled me out of my isolation. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, armed with takeout and a bottle of whiskey. She didn't ask questions at first, just sat beside me on the couch and waited. Eventually, the silence became too much to bear, and the words started pouring out of me. She said it wasn't physical, I said, my voice raw. But how am I supposed to believe her? She lied to me for months. She chose him over me. Layla listened quietly, her expression a mix of sympathy and anger. You don't have to believe her, she said finally. But you do have to decide what you want. Do you think you can move past this? Or is it too much? I don't know. I admitted. I don't even know who I am without her. She was my world, Layla. And now, I don't know if I even want to try. Layla squeezed my shoulder. You don't have to figure it all out right now. But you do need to take care of yourself. You can't let this destroy you. Her words stayed with me long after she left. I knew she was right. I couldn't keep spiraling like this. The pain wasn't going to go away on its own, and if I wanted to move forward, I needed help. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with Layla's therapist, Dr. Hirsch. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect. Therapy wasn't something I'd ever considered before. I'd always thought I could handle things on my own. But as I sat in that quiet, welcoming office, the walls lined with books and soothing artwork, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Dr. Hirsch didn't judge me or tell me what to do. Instead, he asked questions that forced me to confront the emotions I'd been trying to bury. He helped me see that Clara's actions weren't a reflection of my worth, but a choice she made, one that had nothing to do with me. That distinction was hard to accept at first, but over time, it became a lifeline. Still, the road to acceptance was anything but smooth. There were days when the anger felt like it would consume me, when I wanted to lash out at Clara and make her feel the pain she'd caused me. Other days, the sadness was so overwhelming that I could barely get out of bed. I missed her despite everything. I missed the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her latest project. I missed the life we'd built together, even if it had all been a lie. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, reliving moments from our happiest years. Our honeymoon in Hawaii, where we'd spent hours exploring hidden beaches and laughing over bad cocktails. The first Thanksgiving we hosted in our tiny apartment, crammed with friends and family. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what we'd had and what we'd lost. But as painful as those memories were, they also gave me clarity. I realized that I couldn't let Clara's betrayal define me. I couldn't let her choices dictate the rest of my life. I deserved better than that. I deserved to find happiness, even if it meant letting go of the life I thought I wanted. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I went back to work, leaning on my colleagues for support. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the years I'd spent wrapped up in my marriage. I even joined a local running group, something I'd been meaning to do for years, but had always put off. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like a battle, but it was a start. Through it all, I kept seeing Dr. Hirsch. He helped me process the pain, the anger, the grief. He helped me see that it was okay to feel all of it, that healing wasn't a straight line. And little by little, I began to find peace. Clara reached out a few times, asking if we could talk. At first, I ignored her messages, unable to face the idea of seeing her again. But eventually, I realized that I needed closure. Not for her sake, but for mine. When we finally sat down to talk, I was surprised by how calm I felt. Clara apologized again, her voice thick with emotion. She begged me to give her another chance, to let her prove that she could change. But as I listened to her, I realized that I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to rebuild something that had been so deeply broken. I forgive you, I said finally, but I can't be with you anymore. The words were painful, but they were also freeing. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Walking away from Clara was the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was also the most necessary. After our conversation, I packed the last of my things and moved into a modest apartment across town. The silence of the new space was both unsettling and comforting. A blank slate, free from the weight of the life I'd left behind. At first, the loneliness was crushing. I'd spent 12 years building my world around Clara, and without her, everything felt hollow. The routines we'd shared, Saturday morning coffee, Sunday grocery runs, were now stark reminders of her absence. I hated how much I missed her, even after everything she'd done. But slowly, I began to fill the void. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and volunteering for tasks I'd usually shy away from. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about reminding myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. Layla was a constant presence during this time, checking in on me and dragging me out of the apartment when she thought I needed it. One evening, over beers on her balcony, she asked me something that stuck with me. "What do you want your life to look like, Jonah? Forget Clara. Forget the past. What do you want?" The question stopped me in my tracks. For so long, my life had been about Clara and the future we'd planned together. I hadn't thought about what I wanted outside of that. But as I sat there, staring out at the city lights, a glimmer of an answer began to form. I wanted a life that felt like mine, a life where I could explore the passions I'd set aside, where I could connect with people who saw me for who I was, not who I used to be. That night, I started making a list. It wasn't anything grand or ambitious, just small things I wanted to try, places I wanted to visit, experiences I'd always been curious about. Learning to cook something other than spaghetti, taking a pottery class, running a 10K. It was a strange mix, but it felt like a start. One of the first things I tackled was pottery. I found a local studio that offered beginner workshops and signed up on a whim. Walking into that studio for the first time was nerve-wracking. I felt out of place among the artists and their half-finished sculptures. But the instructor, a kind woman named Ellen, made me feel welcome. She handed me a lump of clay and told me to just play with it, to let my hands guide me. It was messy and awkward, and my first few attempts at making a bowl looked more like misshapen blobs. But there was something incredibly satisfying about the process, about creating something with my own 2 hands. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of joy. Pottery became my escape, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of the wheel and the feel of the clay. Over time, I got better. My bowls stopped looking like blobs, and I even managed to make a mug that didn't leak. It wasn't just about the pottery, though. It was about the people I met. The studio was filled with a mix of artists, hobbyists, and curious beginners like me, all of us drawn together by a shared love of creation. One of those people was Priya, an aspiring ceramicist with a contagious laugh and an uncanny ability to turn clay into art. She had a way of making everyone in the studio feel at ease, and before long, we struck up a friendship. At first, it was just casual conversations during class, but soon we were grabbing coffee after sessions and swapping stories about our lives. Priya was different from anyone I'd ever known. She was open and honest in a way that was both refreshing and a little intimidating. She didn't shy away from asking tough questions or sharing her own struggles. Her vulnerability made me feel safe to share mine, and before long, she knew more about my past than anyone else. "What happened with Clara wasn't your fault," she said one evening as we sat on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You deserve to find someone who values you for who you are, not who they need you to be." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been carrying the weight of Clara's betrayal, questioning what I could have done differently. But hearing Priya say that, I realized that maybe it wasn't about what I did or didn't do. Maybe it was about finding someone who saw me as enough, just as I was. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and Priya understood that. But our friendship became a source of light in my life, a reminder that healing didn't have to happen alone. Months passed, and little by little, I started to feel like myself again. The pain of Clara's betrayal didn't disappear. It still lingered like a dull ache, but it no longer defined me. I'd found new passions, new connections, and a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Looking back, I realized that Clara's betrayal, as devastating as it was, became a turning point. It forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd been neglecting, to rediscover who I was outside of our marriage. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it led me to a place I never expected, a place where I felt free. Now, as I sit in my little apartment, surrounded by the pottery I've made and the life I've built, I feel a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. The future is still uncertain, but for the first time, that doesn't scare me. I'm learning to embrace the unknown, to trust that I'll be okay no matter what comes next. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that we're stronger than we think. We can survive heartbreak and betrayal, and we can come out the other side with a deeper understanding of ourselves. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's worth it. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, you're not alone. It might feel like the end of the world right now, but I promise it's not. Take it one day at a time, and don't be afraid to ask for help. You'll get through this. What about you? If you've ever faced a betrayal like this, how did you move forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.